now.
All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome. So you are here with us today for the election telebriefing for New Jersey journalists about voting for this fall's elections. And I'm Stephanie Murray. I'm with the Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State University. And we're really glad to have you here today. So today's session is all on the record, and we are recording the session. We're recording it so we can share it back to you later, especially if there's a quote or a comment that you want to take from one of our speakers to make sure that it's accurate. You will have that. So just note that everything we discussed today is on the record, and it's intended for you to be able to talk directly to sources about how to vote in New Jersey's elections this fall. And our entire goal with this briefing and anything else we can do to support you as journalists is to help get the word out and help you produce content that will help New Jersey residents understand the voting process, because we are in a time of a lot of mis and disinformation, as we will be talking about today. I want to thank the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation and Democracy Fund for their support of the center, which allows us to do this webinar and others that we do throughout the year. So 2 quick notes before I introduce our speakers. One is that everyone should have received an email from Eventbrite from us today that had the materials for today's session, along with short bios for each of the speakers. If you didn't get that, drop a note in the chat and I'm happy to re-forward it to you, or it might be in your spam. We will also drop some of the links, the things that the speakers reference in the chat as well today, and so you'll have that. Second is that the chat will be active and open. Please introduce yourself if you don't mind in the chat. We're not going to go around the whole room. So if you want to share your contact information, who you are, do that in the chat. Any questions that you have for the speakers as they're talking, please start putting them in the chat. So the format of how it will work today is, in just a moment, I'm going to hand it over, and each of our speakers are going to share some information and some short remarks. Then we'll open it up for Q&A, and that's your opportunity to ask anything that you'd like. But if you're able to drop your questions in the chat ahead of time, that will help us queue up questions so that we can go to you with your question. You can ask it directly. So I do encourage you to drop your questions in the chat, because we have an hour together and we might run out of time. So with that being said, let's jump in and introduce our speakers. So I'm really grateful to welcome today first Brigid Harrison, who's professor of political science and law at Montclair State University. That's where our center is based. And she's taught here since 1994. She's the author of American Democracy Now!, which is one of the leading introductory political science textbooks in the US. And she's a very frequent media commentator on US politics. You've probably seen her on TV or in articles. You probably have quoted her for, I'm sure some of you. We also have with us Henal Patel from the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. Henal is the director of the Democracy and Justice program there at the Institute. And before joining the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, she was an associate at McElroy, Deutsch, Mulvaney, and Carpenter, and a law clerk to Chief Justice Stuart Rabner on the New Jersey Supreme Court. And then, of course, we're very grateful to welcome from Rutgers University, Dr. Elizabeth Maddow. She directs the Eagleton Institute of Politics Center for Youth Political Participation, which leads research as well as educational and public service efforts designed to encourage and support the political learning of high school and college students and civic action among young adults. And she's going to talk a little bit more about that today. So with that, I will turn it over to our first speaker, which is Brigid Harrison from Montclair State.
Hey everyone. First off, thank you, Stephanie, and everyone for organizing this event. So my role here is essentially to talk a little bit about some of the data for New Jersey voters historically, and that has really important implications about this election. What we know is that there is, because of changes to the voting process and high levels of misinformation out there in the public realm, there are certain populations that are much more vulnerable to misinformation. And so I'm going to share, before I share that information, I also wanted to call your attention. It just came out earlier today, but Monmouth University, my friend Patrick Murray, his organization conducted a poll. And I thought it was some interesting statistics today that were released, and I'll share this in the chat when I'm done speaking. But 52% of voters thought that it was very or somewhat likely that President Trump would cheat on the election in order to win. And even 8% of his own supporters believed that that was the case. While the figures were much less for Joe Biden, there still is a substantial proportion of the population that believe that the candidates are not, that they'll cheat in order to win. And, you know, of course, some of this has been fomented in the public realm, but I just wanted to share, I'm going to share my screen with you now so you can see some data. All right. And are you seeing that?
Not yet.
Okay, I get it. Oh.
While Bridget is getting that set up, I just want to let everybody know one more time, when you do post things in the chat, make sure that it says right above your message, it'll say to everyone, so that you're sending it to the whole group and not just to one of the hosts. Sometimes we get people who are meant to be speaking to everybody and they are not. Okay, there we go. We can see your screen now, Bridget. You're all set.
Perfect. Okay. So what this data is New Jersey voter registration and their actual voting, that is the turnout, as a share of the population by race and ethnicity. And we're looking at the 2016 election because obviously that was the last presidential election. I wanted to call your attention to a couple of pieces of data. First off, what we see here is that there, among particularly communities of color, there are differentials in when it comes to race and ethnicity in turnout. And so, for example, if we look at the Asian American population, relatively high levels of voter turnout compared to registration. Of course, one of the things that we know is that Asian Americans are among the least likely to register to vote. And there are some historic reasons for that I'm not going to go into, but would be happy to talk in another forum about that. When we're looking at Black voters, this is one of the gap differentials that is part of the explanation for President Trump's win. Of course, we know that Black voters are amongst the most cohesive group of voters for the Democratic Party. But I wanted to call your attention to the Census Bureau calls Hispanic voters Hispanic, not Latino. And so I wanted to call your attention to this, first off, the registration totals and the gap here, right? So this is in 2016 in the last presidential election. Let's move into 2018. Now, this is not an apples to apples comparison because this is obviously a midterm election. In New Jersey, there aren't particularly competitive midterm congressional elections, so it's not surprising to see that there are lower voter turnouts. But I wanted to call your attention to two things. First off is there's a very significant gap in the turnout among Asian American voters. But one of the things that we see that will be incredibly important moving into 2020 is that the proportion of Hispanic voters, while voter registration in the state overall declines, the proportion of Hispanic voters increases by 10% between 2016 and 2018. This is important for several reasons. First off, what are the root causes? One of the root causes we know is that there is a kind of mobilization among Latinos because they are, you know, kind of politicized by many of President Trump's comments. That's reason number one. But the second thing here is that when we are looking at Latino voter turnout, this is symbolic of a larger metamorphosis in not just New Jersey's voting population, but also nationally. There's a 10% increase in the proportion of Latino voters moving from 2016 to 18, and that is continuing to grow. So I just wanted to also share with you, compare that, for example, with a 3% increase among Asian American voters. Among African American voters or Black voters, it is stable between 2016 and 2018. And there's about a 3% dip among white voters between 2016 and 2018, which is also emblematic of the decrease in the proportion of white voters as a constituent population among the American electorate. So that 10% increase is incredibly important, and particularly for those of you who cover Latino politics or whose readership or audience is primarily Latino. One of the things that we know both from data and anecdotally is that Latinos are likely to face more opposition when it comes to voting than other populations. And I know that Henal was going to talk a little bit about that, and I think Dr. Maddow is as well. I just wanted to give you my last little thing here. Let me move you over so I can see. So this is, when we're looking at 2020, we're looking at almost 500,000 potential Latino voters in the state of New Jersey. And when we look at their self-identified party identification, in some ways they look exactly like New Jersey voters in that a large number or a large proportion of them are other. What we know other is unaffiliated, or what some states call independent voters. What is significant about this is that there is such a small proportion of Republican voters, and this is obviously part of the political culture in which we live, but it also kind of begs the question about, in this time of COVID, how political parties are outreaching voters, particularly when sometimes they may not have the mechanism when it comes to language skills and the kind of connections that are necessary to bring voters out. So I'm going to wrap up there, and I think that Henal is following me, if that is correct. And let me stop sharing my screen so that you're not.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much. Yes, I am following Brigid Harrison's great presentation on voter registration. And I just wanted to I'll start off with registration, so it kind of goes with what we've been talking about. So as we've seen, registration numbers are crucial. Who is registered to vote then does have an impact on who actually turns out. Voter turnout is the second question, because you can't figure out turnout before figuring out who is actually registered to vote. So that's incredibly important this year in New Jersey. It's always important, but this year it has taken on a new light because of COVID-19. Just as COVID-19 has impacted basically every part of our lives, it has impacted this. So, which means what? It means that in the last few months, so since April, especially May, June, July, our voter registration numbers in the state of New Jersey have plummeted. They are significantly lower than they usually are in comparative years. So I have some numbers from May, for example. The voter registration turnout from in May of 2020 was about almost 1,500% lower than the voter registration numbers in 2016, even 500% lower than the ones in 2019. 2019, which is a big election year for New Jersey, as you all know, because every seat in our assembly was up for election, but it is an off year. Historically, just across the country, you always see higher voter registration numbers on presidential election years, for obvious reasons. People are just more, are attuned to the elections. So the fact that it's so much lower this year is just is concerning. It means that people who likely would register, who wanted to register, didn't have the opportunity. Why is that? Why did COVID impact that? Well, it's because mainly up until now, New Jersey relied on, essentially the only way to register to vote is if you had a paper form. You can go to voter registration drives. We do have a robust apparatus to allow people to register at voter registration drives. Colleges have them, all of these things where you can print out the form online. However, if you're not in college, if you're remote, if all the registration drives are closed because everyone's social distancing, if you don't have a printer at home, which a lot of people don't, I personally don't have one, you can't print it out, you're not going to be able to actually register. Counties were, if you called your county, they were sending you one with prepaid postage, which was really nice, but not everyone knew of that option. And two, county clerks themselves were working on reduced hours. The other way to register to vote in New Jersey, which we do have, which was significant, is we have automatic voter registration in New Jersey. And by the way, Bridget, I want to touch base with you later to see if that's one of the reasons why Asian registration numbers is higher in New Jersey than it is in a lot of places in the country. But we have automatic voter registration, which is great, but it's done through a motor vehicle. As many of you know, motor vehicles was stopped for in-person services. So other than online, you weren't doing, you weren't able to register to vote for months. We have one big, we have now the ability to address this. Fortunately, I'm going to share my screen. New Jersey, as of Friday, we finally have online voter registration. That is significant. A law was passed back in January to have one ready to go. It was extended the way because of COVID, the time to have it ready. But as of Friday, it is up. I'm going to go through it in a second. It has been tremendous, and it's very user friendly. And I think the biggest thing we need to do is make sure New Jerseyans are aware of it. This is an incredibly anticipated election. It is also, you know, arguably the most important one in our lifetime. We need to make sure that everybody has a meaningful opportunity to express their voice, to actually participate and exercise their right to vote. So they need to have these options available. This is particularly true for communities of color, which have been hurt worse by the pandemic this year. So I'm going to share my screen with everybody to discuss the online voter registration system. I'll put the link in the chat box in a few minutes, but if you go to the Division of Elections website, it is there. A lot of people aren't aware yet. However, those who are using it. We saw the Secretary of State's office release some numbers just over the long weekend. So 3 days after it was up, 13,000 people in the state of New Jersey registered using the online voter registration system. So it is already making a dent, and it can be much more effective. So if you see this system, one thing I wanted to point out, it is available in multiple languages. So English, Spanish, Korean, and Gujarati. So this is an indication. Clearly, this is because of our significant Latino population, significant Asian population, but it is important that you can just register using that. So I'll point out, it literally just changes the language if people click. Note the ways to register. It is very similar to registering with a paper form. And what you would do is you can use your driver's license number. You put your driver's license number in, that connects you to a motor vehicle, and you can register to vote. This is very similar to how online voter registration systems work in a lot of different places around the country. I wanted to flag something though. While we're later than most states on getting online voter registration, one big benefit we have with it is that you actually don't need to have a driver's license in order to register. We have a second option. In a lot of states, it is only available with someone who has a driver's license or a motor vehicle ID number. Here in New Jersey, you can use the last 4 digits of your social security number and register to vote. You will have to sign. You can sign online on the screen itself, and that'll allow you to register. It is accessible on computers, on your tablet, on your phone. So it is really handy and convenient for potential voters across the state. It is also important to note that you can use this system to update your registration information. Listen, people move all the time, but it's particularly true right now that people are displaced from their homes. It could be, hey, they're in college. They might be registered usually in their college address, but right now they're remotely at home right now and going to school there, and their voter registration is still at their college. It could be people are just displaced because they're social distancing, staying with family, or not staying with family. We've seen an increase in evictions, unfortunately. There's a lot of reasons why people might have changed their address. You can update your registration information. That is incredibly important to do, especially because, and I'll turn this over and I'll try to be relatively quick. I apologize. I know I tend to go on for a little bit. Because of the way we're doing our election this year, we are, for November, similar to July, we are going to have an election that is different than we're used to. We're calling this, and we hope other people do too, it is a paper ballot election. Which means that is how we're all going, almost everybody is going to vote. Namely, if someone has a disability and they need an accommodation, they are allowed to vote by machine. Similarly, if you, for whatever reason, need access to other languages for voter registration, there are a number of other registration forms available in different languages. It's just, they unfortunately still have to use the paper form. It is on the Division of Elections website. In terms of how we're doing the election, I just wanted to run it through for everybody, so I know there's lots of questions and confusion about it. We've been hit with tons of questions. It's a paper ballot election. You can vote 5 different ways. First, you get the ballot. Every active registered voter in New Jersey is going to be mailed their vote by mail ballot, which is great. You get it. It is in light of COVID-19 and the public health crisis we're in. Once you get that ballot, what can you do? Well, you can put it in the USPS box or at the post office, just like a traditional vote by mail system. That's your first way of being able to vote. If that happens, it's important to remember, try to put it in the mail as early as possible. Make sure it has a postmark on it. Right now, there were a number of ballots that were rejected, a significant number of ballots that were rejected in July because they just arrived too late. We do have a system in place that if a ballot is missing a postmark and arrives within 48 hours, or has a postmark and arrives within 7 days, it does count. But to be fair, to be safe, put it in the box as early as possible. Take it to the post office. Make sure there's a postmark. Do that. Or in order to alleviate any concerns about it, you can use some of the other options. Second option, you could use a secure Dropbox. We had 5 per county in July. They were incredibly popular for the people who knew about them and used them. Unfortunately, not everybody knew about them. They didn't know those were an option. If we are expanding the number, every county has between 11 and 17 or 18 boxes. They are putting them all over the place. You can use any box in your county. Has to be in your county, but any box in your county. Those secure drop boxes, they're basically, I have a little picture here, and I'll it looks like this. This is the Union County one. They all look similar. They just have a different county name on them. They look like very big mailboxes. You put it in there. Those are run by secured by the county, so they are accessible 24/7, have 24-hour security in place, video surveillance, so they are secure. They are also the county collects those ballots directly, so there is no concern about the mail. It basically lets you mail your ballot by cutting out USPS, so any concerns about the mail can be addressed to them. Third option, you can go and drop it off yourself at the Board of Elections office. They're the ones who count the ballot. You can go to your county Board of Election and drop it off there. Fourth, you can drop it off at your polling location on election day. This is significant. We didn't have this option in July. We have it now. We advocated for it. We're so glad they did it. Why? Because every single municipality is going to have at least one polling location available, polling location open for the election. So that means every single municipality in the state has a place you can drop off your vote by mail ballot. Just go there, you can drop it off, and the count, it's your election officials running it. It gets there, you do not have to worry about the mail. And fifth, again, we have those polling places. You can just vote in person. If for whatever reason you cannot vote by mail because, hey, maybe you didn't get your ballot in time, maybe you were newly registered and there wasn't enough time to send you a ballot, to get your ballot, or you feel more comfortable voting in person, and a lot of people do, right? Like I mentioned, there's issues with people being displaced a little bit, so you might not have received your ballot at where you expected to receive it, or you might just need you have language access needs, or you need help filling out your ballot. You can go vote in person. It is by paper provisional ballot. Those ballots count. They count just as much as any other ballot do. They just, we have them in place for a security measure. Vote by mail ballots are counted first, then provisional ballots to make sure people didn't vote twice. But they count, and you fill it out at your polling location. You put it in, it's a paper ballot like any other. So I will now turn it over. I know it went on for a bit, but I'm happy to answer any other questions about this. I'll also point out we have on our website, njisj.org/vote. We have a lot of information and answers to frequently asked questions. I'll put both links into the chat box.
One thing for our speakers going forward, and I'm somebody who does this all the time, but some of the attendees were wondering if we could speak a little slower especially around important things. It's sometimes hard to pick up all of it. I will note that we are having a transcript of this whole thing, so you will be able to go back and read the rough transcript, but just a note going forward. Sorry.
My bad. I apologize. It is a constant problem for me.
I do the same thing all the time, so I get it.
And I'm happy to go next. My name is Elizabeth Maddow, and I direct the Center for Youth Political Participation at the Eagleton Institute of Politics at Rutgers University. And I feel the same amount of passion about this topic, so I'll try to speak slowly also. But I really welcome this opportunity, because whenever given an opportunity these last few weeks, I want to be really shouting from the rooftops how important it is to be getting a very accurate, robust, vocal public education program out there in New Jersey and nationwide regarding changes to election day practices. You know, in particular, from my perspective, it's really important that we update, reach out to our college students, because as we know, as was alluded to earlier by Professor Harrison, you know, it tends to be segments of the population with maybe the limited history, limited voting history, limited experience when it comes to voting, people who move frequently that are hit hardest by changes to the election. And certainly young adults fall in that category. It's worth mentioning that young adults, although unfairly maligned, I think, for their voter participation, were really poised, and hopefully are still really poised, to turn out in large numbers this election. Although for quite some time, youth voter turnout has been low compared to the rest of the population, we have seen significant gains in recent elections. So for example, between 2014 and 2018, voter turnout rates among young adults doubled. And you know, Henal was referencing earlier, and it's accurate, that voter registration rates in New Jersey are low. One thing that's really encouraging, though, about youth voter turnout rates or youth registration rates, compared to where youth voter registration rates were in 2016, they're significantly higher among young adults, specifically in New Jersey. Among 18 to 19-year-olds, we have an increase of maybe 30 to 40% in voter registration rates. So that is really a testament to how much good work New Jersey has done when it comes to civic education, whether it's at the high school level or at the college level, have really done excellent work in the last few years, not just here in New Jersey, but colleges and universities around the country have been taking preparing, engaging their students for elections much more seriously for a number of reasons. I can share, I can share why. One of them, and I can put it in the chat box too, one of them is we now have data that we've never had before about what our registration rates are and what our turnout rates are, thanks to some research done by Tufts, the National Study for Learning, Voting, and Engagement. And I'll put it in the chat box. But bottom line is, young adults were poised to make a significant impact on this upcoming election. And it's worth noting that Millennials and Gen Z, so just a little primer here, that Millennials are those born between 1981 and 1996. Gen Z are those born after 1996. They make up about 37% of the electorate nationwide. There are 20 million college students around the country. However, as I indicated, although young adults tend to have very strong voter registration rates, it takes a lot of effort to get them out on election day. And the fact that so many students are not going to be on their college campuses this year, or are maybe on college campuses now, but as the pandemic rolls to different parts of the country in different ways, there are students who might be on campus now who are not going to be on campus on election day. All those voter registration drives, get out the vote drives that we would have typically done, we can't do. We can't be doing that in-person get out the vote work that we typically do. So, and for many reasons, the youth vote is really under threat this year. Also, young adults don't tend to vote by mail. For young adults who are voting, they tend to vote in person. So they don't have a practice, they don't have experience voting by mail. So I completely agree that there should be expansive vote by mail this year in New Jersey and nationwide due to the pandemic, but it's really important to understand that young adults don't have that experience. So what we're really trying to do at Rutgers University, and what I really want to encourage all educators to be doing right now, is to really be very vocal, very reaching out as as much as they can to their students to encourage them to walk them through the voter registration process, to walk them through election day practices right now. The first thing we're telling our students, and it echoes what Henal was saying, is to check their voter registration status, and most importantly, be really sure where your ballot is going and determine whether or not that's where you want your ballot to go. And you have to do that now. As we know, ballots are going to be sent out early October, I think October 5th. They're really printing things up right now, printing out labels right now. In the next week, they're going to be printing out labels. As I said, I'm here on the Rutgers campus, and Rutgers is mainly remote. Rutgers, New Brunswick is mainly remote this summer. This semester. So we have a number of Rutgers students who are registered to vote here in New Brunswick. They registered in their residence halls. Now, they are not here to get their ballots on election day. So it's critical right now that students go and check their voter registration status and check to see where their ballot is going, and to make arrangements in whatever way they choose. First of all, students can update their voter registration. If they are home now, whether they're still here in New Jersey or Ohio or Georgia, they can update their voter registration and be a registered voter in the location in which they're registered currently. One thing that's really important to understand too, there's been some discussion and some memos that have come out by groups such as the Institute for Democracy in Higher Education, the Andrew Goodman Foundation, arguing that even if you are not on campus right now, but planned to vote on campus, your intention is to come back to campus, that your residency can and should be maintained in your campus location. So for example, if you have students who are registered here on campus, were it not for the pandemic, they would be here, that you can maintain your voter registration here in your campus community, but you can change where your ballot is delivered. And that you do by filling out a vote by mail application. So first of all, really telling students right now that it's very important that if they are already an active voter, as Henal mentioned, you need to really know where your ballot is going. However, if you're not registered to vote, you do have options available to you as far as how you can register to vote. You need to make sure you meet that deadline on October 13th to get yourself registered here in New Jersey. But then also for a state like New Jersey, where there's going to be extensive vote by mail, it's critically important that everyone, but students who have very little history, know how to fill out that vote by mail ballot. And that we use whatever modes of communication we can to get out the message, how you fill out that ballot. I filled mine out this summer, and there were a couple times I had to stop and read the directions 2 or 3 times. I almost took off, there's a perforated form. You think you're gonna tear that off, you don't. So it's really, really important that we walk students through, not just letting them know that they have to fill out this vote by mail, that they have to vote by mail, but helping them understand how to do it correctly. Because what we don't want is for students' ballots to be thrown away because they're filled out incorrectly. So again, I'm really encouraging campuses, not just in New Jersey, but nationwide, to get out accurate, nonpartisan, current information. And I can share, if folks could share my screen, we have on at Rutgers, the initiative I run is called Are You Voting? And we have a website, our webpage on our website that really is meant to be a one-stop shop for Rutgers students, that really walks them through the process, especially now that there have been changes to the election. So this is one resource that's available and should be applicable for students throughout New Jersey. We are also next week are going to be launching a microsite based on the work that we've done here on the Rutgers campus for 15 years. We're going to be launching a microsite called areyouvoting.rutgers.edu that is applicable for students across the country. So taking this one-stop shop model that we used for New Jersey students, we've created one that will be applicable to students around the country, helping them get state-level information about how to get registered and how to cast their ballot this fall. And again, really amplifying. There are certain pockets of the population that are going to be hit hardest by these changes, by norms and practices being upended. Certainly young adults are one of those segments of the populace. And this is 20 million people, eligible voters, that they stand to be significantly negatively impacted. And we want to do everything we can to get out the word and get them voting this fall. So I'll stop there, and I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'll put a few resources in the chat box.
Okay, so we do have some questions, and I want to scroll back up before we get into it. We had a couple of questions starting up at the top here. First of all, Moshin wants to know, Henal, if you're going to be available to for an interview in Hindi or Urdu, if possible. And I gave them your contact information, either you or someone who may be able to help out. We have a couple of folks on the call who are English as a second language, and so that would be awesome if you can connect them with resources that would help them to do that. So Raymond Tyler wants to know, what happens if a ballot is misplaced or not sent? Who should they contact if that happens? And I'll let all three of you can jump in. Whoever is ready to go, you can just jump in.
So you can, if there's any issue with your ballot, so it could be, you know, you never got one, like you were expecting one. And look, they're going to start mailing them out toward, depending on the county, they're going to start mailing them out in about in next week or so. Starting that process. Everyone's going to have mailed them out early October. But, you know, by the second, third week of October, if you don't receive one yet, you should, you know, look into that, making sure that you absolutely get your ballot in time. So if you never got one, or if you need a replace, you misplaced it, or hey, and I will kind of touch on what Elizabeth, Dr. Maddow said. If you mess up a little bit, listen, it is a confusing ballot. All right, it's not just us. I mean, I know I had to read the directions multiple times. Many people have expressed how confusing our ballot design is for the vote by mail ballot. We're encouraging the state to fix that, but this is what we're living with for November. It's fine. And one of the issues is there were a lot of people whose ballots were rejected because they did detach that certificate. And that just is an incomplete ballot. They have to reject it. So what you should do if you mess up, if you're filling it out and you mess up, or you detach it accidentally, call and ask for a replacement ballot. You can call your county, ask for a replacement ballot. They will send you one. Alternatively, if it gets closer to the election, don't send it in. Go to your polling place and vote by provisional ballot. Still counts. This is why it's important to have in-person polling locations available and as an option for people, so that in case there's any of those issues, you have that available.
Yeah.
And Henal, isn't it true that there is a link or a resource where you can confirm that your vote by mail was received and counted, and I think also for provisional ballots also, is that correct?
So we do have a online system and a way to do it by phone to track your ballot. I'm going to be honest, especially for everyone here as you get questions about it. The system itself, it is on the NJ Division of Elections website. You can track your ballot through it. There is a public access account. You have to you can just register. It's a very simple process. You register using either your driver's license, last 4 digits of your social security number, or your voter number. Here's the only hiccup, and I want to make clear in case to prevent any confusion. Depending on the year someone registered, particularly if they registered, say, 20, 25 years ago before HAVA, the Help America Votes Act, they might not have added needed to put their driver's license or social security number on their registration form. So their voter file doesn't include it. So we've seen people where they try to set up a public access site and it doesn't let them do it. And it creates more confusion. It's just a matter of what's in their voter file. The alternative there is you can call your county and you can track it that way. They tell you on the website or at the county level, they'll tell you when the ballot was received back to them, and when it's accepted or rejected. And it's both for your vote by mail and your provisional ballots.
Okay. Yeah, I think there's definitely a question. Zhangwan had a question. I want to jump to his. Zhangwan, you had a question about what happens if, well, why don't you go ahead and ask the question?
Okay. So I think, yes, on the voting, like, you know that there are many immigrant voters with limited English proficiency. So during in-person vote, they are allowed to bring their family or family son or daughter or grandson and assist how to translate the voting material or something. But the mail-in vote is very different. So no in-person assistant is available. So so because of their limited English proficiency, many immigrants, especially senior voters, cannot understand the complex rule of mail-in vote, and highly likely they make a mistake or error. So I think, yeah, on the Voting Rights Act, at least 10 counties must have a duty to provide the translation of their voting information, voting instruction. But I think I point to the Korean, Spanish, or Gujarat or something. But I think many county election offices are not ready for the translation. So is there any other? So my question is, are these election officers ready to provide translation for limited English proficiency voter? And the second, if it is not, so is there any other way points to the voting assistant office or star like in California?
Yeah. So yeah, limited English proficiency voters, they're entitled to receive important election forms and instructions in their language. What steps, if any, are New Jersey counties taking to provide that kind of translation in a timely manner before the deadline? And if that's not happening, what other options do non-English as a first language voters have to help them fill out these often complex forms?
I don't know if anyone else want to take it. I don't want to dominate everything.
I think you have the expertise on this.
So one thing is, yes. So if depending on your county, it really is. There's federal laws, the Voting Rights Act. There are laws that require that if there is a sufficient population, if the population numbers are high enough, they have to provide all of the materials in those languages. So, for example, I live in Hudson County. All of my vote by mail information is in English and Spanish. They just come to all of us. So depending on the county you live in, they're providing that anyway. They're required to. If you hit any issues or if you hear of anyone having issues, please tell them to contact either the Secretary of State's office. They can contact us. They can contact me and I'll direct them to the right place if that's the easiest way to do it. But because we do sometimes hear of places, there have been isolated incidents where counties didn't provide all the material in the language that they're required to provide. And that is something that they need to do. They are required to comply with those laws. So if there's a failure there, we can address that on a broader level. However, that, just because, again, I'm in Hudson County. It's one of the most diverse counties in the state, if not the country. I get the material in English and Spanish. Great. I speak English. My parents do as well. However, if they need, they're not as comfortable as they are with other languages. It's not coming in all those languages that my family or neighbors might need. So what do you do if that happens? You can, one thing is you can go vote in person. Polling locations are required to, they have people who are required, who are there to, that are required to help you. They can help find someone if there's an issue with a language. You can also bring someone to help. It depends, especially if you can't read and write in English and you need someone to help, you are allowed to bring someone with you. There are some restrictions on who can be, who you can bring. Can't bring, for example, your employer, an agent of your employer, or an officer, an agent of the union if you're in a union. And that's basically just to make sure that you're not being, no one's being coerced in their vote, but they can bring someone to help. That's why, again, in-person voting options are really important and you have that available. I want to stress that again. I know this is something that happens, like the state's calling it a primarily vote by mail election. I keep seeing things where people call it a vote by mail election. It's not wrong. That's not incorrect. But I do think it leads to voters believing there's no opportunity to vote in person, and there is. There's a polling place you can go to in every single town in the state will have at least one. Larger towns will have multiple locations. So while there might be some changes in locations, look, to be honest, we've seen in parts of the state, their polling places are sometimes at like senior centers and senior homes. They've changed those. They have to change them, obviously. Other places, they are consolidating, but they are available. They are nearby. So tell them to use that option. So especially if they have language access needs, it's why those are necessary.
Real quick, several people have asked if it is okay, or what is the procedure for sharing that guide that you shared with all the different ways for folks to vote, that graphic that you shared, Henal. So I don't know if they can get in touch with the communications office at the Institute for Social Justice, or.
Honestly, yes, you're welcome to share it. If you, the link I shared earlier, njisj.org/vote, and I'll share it again. At the bottom, we have them linked as downloadable forms of downloadable documents, and you can share them.
It's okay to publish that as well, right?
Yes, we are putting them on social media. It's on our website. You are welcome to use them.
Okay.
I would recommend too, League of Women Voters of New Jersey has put out some really excellent, they're great on social media. Jessie Burns, who's the executive director, is marvelous. They've really been putting out some very good, a lot of great communication, but really good graphics also on their Facebook and Twitter feed.
Thank you.
Absolutely. We've been working closely with the League all
Yeah.
year, and they're doing great work on that. I will also know for some language access, there are orgs that are really, we've been in contact with, that are really trying to get out there with some other language access, voter information material in different languages. I know, for example, Make the Road is planning. I'm like, I feel like I'm spoiling this on them, but I know they're planning to put out some information as well, and they'll do it in Spanish, certainly. So I know the advocacy community in the state is really trying to get information out. So you can reach out to me. I can try to help you find things in different languages. Unfortunately, we probably can't hit all the languages, but we can probably find resources to provide some information, important information.
Awesome. And Sharon McCloskey, I see your question, but a lot of the questions you asked sort of, I think, have already been touched on. So in the interest of time, I am going to move on, but we will all come back to you at the end in case there was something you felt was not addressed in that question, because I know you'd asked several of them up top, but.
Yep, thanks.
I'm going to move on to Karith. You had a question about the climate, the political climate. Did you want to go ahead and ask that question?
Yeah, so really I just wanted to know earlier, Elizabeth, you made a point about the Gen Z and millennial vote kind of being higher, but that people are more or I guess less inclined to go out and actually cast a vote. But what I was wondering is, based on talking with either students or just on what you may know, are you finding that this year's election, given the candidates, given the current climate that we're living in, where really there isn't sort of a, obviously you're either on the left or on the right in most cases, are you finding more of these younger people looking to want to speak up and want to have a voice this election, given, it's probably one of the larger ones of their lifetime?
Yeah, so first of all, I would say, as I said, before even going into this election, we knew from sort of the youngest millennials and now Gen Z, that this is a very different generation from the generation that has preceded them, in that they very much are interested in politics. While millennials were very civically engaged, interested in volunteering and participating in their communities, Gen Z is very politically interested. And I think one of the first indicators we saw of that was really visible was March for Our Lives. The idea of taking this public problem of gun violence and really closely linking it to politics and identifying political solutions. It matters who serves in public office if you care about gun violence. So I think certainly if you're looking at it through a generational lens, it is a generation that was already poised to be politically engaged. And I think as an educator, Professor Harrison's probably saying the same thing in her classrooms. We have seen one teachable moment after another, not only these last 4 years, but certainly in these last 6 months. There have been so many obvious examples of the role of government, and so many examples of, the role of the citizen to other citizens, the role of the community, what do we expect of public officials. So I think students are very, very interested and inclined to participate in politics. However, My greatest concern is the mechanics of voting. The mechanics of voter registration have always been challenging for young adults. My concern is their inclination right now, when they are particularly inclined to be politically interested, to be politically engaged. They want to vote. There are so many barriers right now that are going to make it more challenging than ever. Which is why it's incumbent upon me, educators, the public at large, to be, first of all, making it as easy as possible, I would say, but getting information out. So I would say, Keith, yes, there's been so much activism among young adults. What we have to do is help them channel it. My role, I feel, as an educator is to help them channel it through democratic institutions and democratic means. But sometimes these institutions aren't easy to access. And
Dr. Maddow,
so, yeah, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Just quickly, yeah, you made a good point about there being barriers. How much of that is by design, or how much of that do you think is really, enforced to keep people from wanting to take action because it is so convoluted?
Well, I mean, and I think we could have a very long conversation. I bring in Professor Harrison on this also about the role of, it is state legislatures that play the primary role around the country in determining registration day practices and election practices. And I think it would be sort of foolish and naive to assume that the people in power, I think we have to always remember that the people in power want to maintain power, and they will often make legislative decisions that ensure that. So I think it would be foolish and kind of naive to assume that there isn't some intentionality behind some of these decisions. I think, for example, we saw the increase in voter ID laws after the election of President Obama, when you had really high youth voter turnout rates, and not just youth voter turnout rates, but several segments of the populace. I think it's not too much of a stretch to assume that's meant to enhance participation among some cohorts and maybe make it a little bit more difficult for others. I don't know if Professor Harrison has anything on that.
I mean, Dr. I would just piggyback on that. I think in New Jersey, if we're looking at voter laws, we are among the best in encouraging and making it easy for people to vote. That is not the same throughout the United States. And it doesn't mean that we're doing it perfectly, but I think that there is the intention by policymakers to make voting as accessible as possible, which is exactly what you want in a democracy. I think that one of the challenges that we see with regard to youth participation in voting, so Dr. Matto referred to kind of the March for Our Lives, particularly in the aftermath of the Parkland shooting, where we saw an incredible mobilization of young Gen Z people, so much different from the millennials who had gotten involved in other issues like gay marriage. This was really a salient issue for them. And we see this continuing on with the Black Lives Matter marches throughout the summer. The challenge in my mind is particularly you have these young people dispersed, right? They're in their bedrooms, they're not in their dorm rooms. And what we know about millennials and Gen Z people is that they have very strong bonds with people of their own generation fomented on social media. And they act in groups, right? So they're very cohort oriented. We're not facilitating a voting day that enables them to go out and vote and wear their I voted stickers, right? If they're doing it at their kitchen table, which is not, so one of the roles that both people in academics, but also journalists can play is conveying kind of the spirit and the camaraderie associated in a nonpartisan way with voting. I think that's really important for young people who are already inclined to be civically engaged, who are incredibly concerned about issues. These are issue-driven generations. They're not, they do tend to break partisan, but what is driving them to politics is concern over issues. And we can play a really strong role in encouraging them to come out and vote.
I want to chime in for one quick thing on this to add to that. I agree with both of them completely on this. One thing in terms of at least New Jersey, I think they're right that we're not seeing, we see this in other places, but New Jersey, you're not seeing a concerted effort to suppress or put up obstacles for people to vote, which is
Right.
good. It's good. I mean, we
Right.
would be right there to try to stop that if there were. However, one of the challenges we often see, and this is just, I think, across the board, elected officials we see, is sometimes they don't change things unless they're forced to, unless the problem is so dire that they're like, oh crap, we have to act. So, even if there's like a persistent long-term problem, it's like, oh, is there a political will to do it? So you have, for example, why are we voting by mail and by provisional ballot? Why can't we vote by machine in New Jersey, right? It's a security measure. It's to ensure that someone didn't vote twice. We wouldn't need to do it this way if we had electronic poll books, for example.
Right.
It's something we've been talking about for a long time. They're a little expensive and it's just been put off. We right now, if you recall last year, if you go, we still use those paper poll books where people have to come in and sign. That's fine, but it means that you don't have a way of verifying just by a poll book that someone didn't vote already. So they have to do it this way. Now it's a dire situation and you're seeing a little bit of movement on getting electronic poll books.
Right.
Voter registration numbers are plummeted. We've been trying to encourage people. One thing that's been a part of the discussion is, hey, maybe it's time to get same-day registration, including on election day.
Right.
A lot of other states have it. Over 20 states around the country have this. Why shouldn't we have it? We could do it safe, it's secured, it's cost effective if you do it by provisional ballot, and it would mean a lot of these issues about getting registered, a lot of these issues about where you could register, being able to vote in person, like young people, especially as young people, as the states that have same-day registration see an actual increase, particularly from young people.
Absolutely, right.
So it's like, hey, can we do it? And it's something that advocates keep talking about right now when we talk about a problem. But it's always a matter of, oh, do we absolutely need to right now, or what if will this make things harder, or things like that. So
Right.
you do see a little bit of an unfortunate reality is like they tend to be a little stagnant on things. So people they might not be throwing up obstacles, which is good, but to make things easier and accessible, especially addressing the problems, to the question that that was asked, it's sometimes.
We do have.
And I would say that's not unique. That's a United States problem. When we look at comparable democracies, the United States as a country makes it a little bit more challenging, than comparable democracies when it comes to getting registered and voting on election day. And then you throw in federalism, the variety between states. And as was mentioned earlier, we know that those states that have models that, maybe it's early voting or same-day voter registration, that those voter turnout rates are always higher. So, right, not necessarily a question of purposeful suppression of the vote, but my question is always, how can we make it more accessible when we have lots of models out there to make it accessible?
I do want to get to one more question. We did have this until 4:30. I already appreciate you all for taking this time for doing that. It is 4:29. We did have two questions, one from Karith and one from Michelle, about older voters. Michelle, did you want to ask your question? We'll just have you unmute real quick and then you can ask. There we go.
Did that work?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, my question is, I've been told that if a person goes in and signs an affidavit at the polls that says, I am handicapped, I need to use the machine, they're not allowed to be asked what their handicap is, they're not allowed to be questioned, but that someone could then challenge their ability to vote by machine. Is that your understanding? And because I have heard from a lot of older people who just are so confused by the ballot and who feel very strongly that they want to be able, they don't want to have somebody else looking over their shoulder as they fill something out, helping them fill it out. They want privacy in the booth. Can people in fact just go in and fill out this affidavit and feel comfortable that nobody's going to challenge them?
Thank you.
So I'll say this, look, that is an option available for people with disabilities under the Americans with Disabilities Act. I think we need to be careful not to encourage people to do that just because they prefer to vote by machine. It is an actual, this is a accommodation, a disability accommodation that is available under federal law. And it is an important one. And other people who don't need an accommodation shouldn't take advantage of that. So I just wanted to kind of flag that. But the way it should work, but there are a lot of people who do need that option, legitimately need that. If you go in, you fill out a form. They cannot ask you what your disability is. That would be asking for healthcare information, so they don't ask you that. You fill it out, say, I need an accommodation, and then you can go vote by the one machine every polling place will have. It is kind of separated out, but you can go vote on it. As for challenges, the way our system works is basically every vote, when you go vote, and this is, you know, in the past too, right? Like if you think about back in the, you know, a decade ago, which was November 2019, it feels like a decade ago, but you went in, technically challengers are there from each of the parties, and they could challenge whether or not you can vote. They make a thing going, oh, this person, maybe they're not really registered, or there's some issue or whatever, and they shouldn't be able to vote this vote here or whatever. And there's always a call made and they can vote. So that is something that can happen. So if someone says, hey, I need this vote by machine, someone can challenge just their ability to vote itself. You shouldn't have a situation where someone over there is questioning whether or not they have a legitimate disability. Because that's not something we should that should exist under the law. So again, we should be careful about how we message around that.
Thank you so much. Anybody else, any of our guests wanted to add to that? Okay, I don't think we missed anyone. If they'll permit me, if you will all stay for 3 more minutes, maybe if there was one more question that we missed, you can physically raise your hand. I can see you, I can call on you if I missed you. I know Zhongwan had another question about non-citizens erroneously receiving a mail-in ballot and not knowing that they weren't allowed to vote and doing that. That seems like more of a fringe case, so I do want to get any other questions that that were unaddressed. Eric, go ahead. Unmute yourself there.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for doing this. This is fantastic. I'm a student reporter for Montclair. And I did have a question about, and it has to do with just minority voting. You know, we're in such a partisan and divided electorate. Are you worried about, especially in the state of New Jersey, like cities like Paterson or East Orange, are you worried about, you know, some sort of voter intimidation in these minority districts? You know, how will we be monitoring this and dealing with these issues, especially since we have, you know, I know poll workers are in demand right now. We need more poll workers. We need more, you know, I don't want to say police officers, but you know, helping the situation. Do you guys see? Is there any information that you have about voter intimidation in any of these areas or districts? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I will just say to you, Eric, one of the things that I've seen firsthand, particularly among Latinx voters, is particularly if you have an older election worker manning or personing the polls, and I've seen it where someone might go in and perhaps they have both 2 surnames. And so, you know, they identify themselves as Eric Rivera, but then, you know, their mother's surname is Gomez. And so they may then be challenged because they may have identification with 2 different surnames, including, you know, both parents. And in some counties, what we've seen is that there have been very significant poll worker identification training to recognize that people may have more than 1 surname. But I've also seen it where it has resulted in a challenge to that person voting, and then eventually, you know, campaigns oftentimes step in and try to defend a voter's right. Throughout the state, there will be varying election monitors that can be called upon if there is systematic intimidation. And, you know, I think that people should be aware of that can occur both on the county level, but if you see it on a municipal level as well, in order to prevent that from happening. And Henal may have more to say on this.
Similar, I'll just add to that, saying yes, there is poll monitoring happening. It's a little difficult this year because of social distancing and everyone trying to not crowd places. One thing I'll highlight, one thing to mention, if you hit any issues, even if it's just a question, if a voter hits a question, or especially if they feel coerced or if they're being denied the right to vote for any number of reasons, there is a hotline. It is run, it's a national hotline, but there will be there are New Jersey people banning it, peopling it. It is the number is actually really easy to remember, 1-866-OUR-VOTE. Tell them to call it. There, especially on election day and even leading up to it, there are live people there who can help you address this situation. The Institute for Social Justice with partners sits on an election protection coalition. When we see issues on election day or beforehand, we do try to address it. Even if, like, we work with the ACLU, if absolutely necessary, they can take you to court to defend people's right to vote. People are around. The League of Women Voters has a hotline.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone is here to help and make sure that those issues don't happen. One thing I want to flag that's related, as Bridget said, sometimes there's name issues that create problems with getting the vote. One issue, and it is true sometimes, especially with people who speak different other languages, is signature. New Jersey, and this isn't like a coercion thing, but it is a reason why your ballot could be rejected, which is also not great, right? So long-standing procedure in New Jersey, and it's to make sure essentially that someone else doesn't fill out a ballot, is that when you sign your vote by mail ballot or your provisional ballot, you sign it. It is then at the county level compared to your voter file. The Board of Elections is comparing to make sure there's a match. If there's a missing signature or if it doesn't look like it matches, their ballot is rejected. Previously, it was just wholesale rejected. This year, not anymore. It's tentatively. We actually sued the state back in May to make sure we had a process. There is now a cure process. It was in place in July. Now it's law. So it is in place for November. And basically, that means if there's any issue with the signature, they will mail people a cure form. It comes in the mail. It says, hey, we had an issue. Can you just verify that you were the person who voted? And you put in, you fill it out saying, yes, I voted. Don't you dare reject it, essentially. You put in your ID, your driver's license number, social security, last 4 digits of your social security number, and then you send it back. You can send it back by mail, fax, email, or in person, and you have until 48 hours before certification. So you have about 3 weeks to do that. But this is important. I know all of you speak to a lot of people on this. Not a lot of people know to be looking out for a second mailer after election day. That something's coming important in the mail to make sure that your vote counted. So please, just make sure people are aware of this information, because otherwise, because of signature issues, your ballot might be rejected. And that we do see that happening a lot with people where English is not their first language.
Well,
I would say that should be our call to everyone, I would say, is just making sure we're telling all of, helping, and for me, I'm looking at young voters, really helping them understand everything they need to know, when it comes to getting themselves registered, when it comes to looking for their ballot, when it comes to filling out their ballot, when it comes to what happens on election day. It is a cumbersome process, and for good reason, especially with the vote by mail there's so many safeguards in place to prevent fraud, but it does make it confusing and a little bit more cumbersome. So I think educating ourselves, but also really providing that education, especially to newer voters who, it's going to hit hard.
Well, thank you so much to all of our esteemed panelists today. This was wonderful. I just want to let everyone know that we are going to be sending out links to everyone who registered on the Eventbrite. You'll get a link to this recording. You'll get a link to the audio only version. You'll get a link to a rough automated transcript, which you'll be able to sync to the audio. You'll be able to find specific points in this in case you'd like to quote it. The contact information for all 3 of our panelists will also be shared in case you need to follow up or confirm any quotes. Before I go, any guess on when we'll get election results? Or is that a 40-hour conversation in and of itself as well?
I'm personally not too worried. I know it's something people worry about. To clarify, generally speaking, they have time. You got to just be patient. Everyone shouldn't be too stressed about it. It's the process working. Generally, if the election's so if it's so clearly ahead, they're calling it. So for example, in the primary, Cory Booker's Senate race in the Democratic primary, they called it on election night, even though they were still counting ballots because it was so far ahead.
Right.
So I don't really envision for the presidential or even most of the congressional will be an issue. For some of the closer ones, it will take a while. Just be patient, and that's not new. I think people think that's new to 2020.
Right.
It isn't. In 2018, NJ3, the 3rd congressional district, that took, I forget how long, but it was like a week before they could call it because and it was fine. Everybody was really patient. The democracy withstood that. It was totally fine, and we'll do it again. So I'm not too stressed, but I think, it depends on the race. Some of them we're absolutely going to see on election night.
All right. Well, thank you so much again. We appreciate everybody stopping by, taking the time for this. We'll be doing more of these in the future. Good luck out there, folks, and keep an eye out for our follow-up email with every information. You can always send us an email if you have questions, info@centerforcooperativemedia.org. And that'll do it. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.